Hello, how are you? Today we're going to look at research basics for college students. That's you. Essentially, what I'd like to do is lay the foundation for future work that you might be doing in my class or others, where you need to really understand how to navigate research articles and sources. There's so many things available to you on the internet these days that I really want to walk you through how things are organized and really where to get started. So you'll see here, and I apologize in advance. Let me just tell you that I blew this up so that it's big for you. So there might be a couple of words that look off center, and that's just because I have this zoomed in. I am going to upload the original PowerPoint for you to peruse as well. Sometimes I recommend people printing off and having visuals in front of them when they work. Seeing this information one time is great, but having the visual in front of you can certainly help guide that work and ensure that you have it handy to actually use and frame your thinking as you're completing work in this class or maybe others. So feel free to print that original PowerPoint. This is about these essential skills and the methods so that you can be successful academically. Again, not just in my class, but in others. So it's really laying a foundation for you. A lot of times you will be given assignments, even in this class, where you have to do quote unquote research. So what does that mean and what does that look like? And here you'll see what I'm talking about the word introduction. It's split and it's just because I've zoomed in. So this is an introduction to research. So let's talk about reliable sources. You're going to hear that if you haven't already in your academic career, but this is also something that's important in your professional career. You may be providing information to one of your leaders, managers, owners, bosses, or others might be coming to you with information and you want them to use reliable sources. In both scenarios, knowing what a reliable source is important. This here information talks about why it matters. And we will really want to make sure that we go beyond just the academics. So also think about professionally where sources matter and how that might be relevant. For example, if someone's giving you the outlook on a particular medication and treatment options, you would want to know where are they getting this information from, especially when so much information and unreliable information is available to you and to others. So why does it matter? There's certainly academic and professional implications. Here, it's just, of course, speaks to the foundation of academic writing, but then you can look at how you're avoiding misinformation. You're enhancing your credibility, right? So it's really about, do you navigate information situations? Do you guide the work, both what you're putting out and receiving, with a really reliable and credible lens. But it also promotes critical thinking because it makes you really think back and do some work to find out where information comes from, and it helps you to press others to do the same. Even when I've taught high school, I used to tell the students, hey, yeah, does mom and dad, you get their news information from one source or multiple sources? Are those sources all generated and paid for by someone from a particular business or a certain genre or a certain political party, right? So you have to really think about, if, say, a newspaper, for example, was highly leaning towards one party or the other, and they were pretty much footing the bill, then obviously the information is going to be slanted to support their causes. So you always want to just watch out for things of that nature. So how do you really find, and then how do you evaluate the source? So when we say evaluate the source, how do you find it and then make a decision about a reliable source? So where do we start? Here are 4 wonderful areas for you to start, and this is again where I spoke about maybe printing out information or having a little checklist. And again, you can use this in your academic writing or in your professional work. Look at the authors, right? Let's see who wrote this information. What's their background? Are they kind of on a soapbox all the time and they're really trying to promote something for a certain reason that you can tell. Is there a person who's maybe being paid by a particular company? Really looking at the author is important, as well as the date, how outdated the information. In healthcare, that's super important, right? The publication date matters a lot because the information could have been reliable or valid, at a certain point in time, but at this point in time that you're in now, maybe not so much. Also, looking at the publisher reputation and the tone or the references is important. Let me tell you about publisher reputation and a few things that you can watch out for. So if you ever heard of the terms peer-reviewed journal or scholarly journals, essentially what happens is in most schools, including our own, so you have your resources that the school provides you, where you have academic database access. What that means is there's journals and there's organizations out there that has a very strict criteria for which information has to come through them and flow, and certain criteria has to be met for something to be published. And so they might have a panel, for example, where submissions are sent through, and these panels are made up of experts in a variety of areas in the field, and they really unpack and pull apart say research or a summary or an article. They pull it apart and ensure that it meets this very high ethical and objective criteria, so that you know that just inherently by accessing materials from that source, you know that it's a credible research article. So if it's scholarly, if it's peer reviewed, it means it's gone through this process of review, and you can trust that anything in that academic journal or that database is to be trusted. Again, though, you have to look at the date, right? So it could have met all this criteria 10 years ago, and things changed 5 years ago. So looking at the date is still important. You can't just make assumptions. So this attends to what the slide here is about scholarly versus non-scholarly sources. And here's just a summary, and I'll move myself out of the way again, a summary of the information between scholarly and non-scholarly. I kind of described it a minute ago in lay terms, but here's the academic words for you to see the difference between those two. And I'll give you just a couple of minutes to read this. So one thing that you'll note here is, and I'll kind of give a nod to when I say to you, you should have a natural tone as a student that you're writing in. If you copy and paste something from a scholarly resource in an academic journal, that's going to stand out pretty obviously as plagiarism, because you can't just copy and paste this very formal language that's been practiced and polished and refined. There's just no way we shouldn't expect you to do that. And therefore, if you are copying and pasting information and not summarizing things in your own tone and presenting it in your own words, still maintaining the spirit of the message, right? You're not changing the meaning, but you're putting it into your words that you use, then it's going to stand out, because scholarly sources are that for a reason. And no professor expects a student to write with that tone. Certainly you should write in a tone that's reflective of your status as a student who's growing in those skills, but you certainly, are not expected to write as if you were writing for an academic article. And if you do already, and you do have those skills, great, good on you. But most people are not going to have those skills consistently throughout every line of every paper. Not even the people who write for these journals are able to do that. They put a lot of years of work into that to refine their skills, and they also have teams of people who work to polish up papers. They go through hours and hours and really days and weeks and months of reiterations and editing to get them to be that polished as that final product. So for you to write it after one or two tries would be odd at best. And then these are the things I told you that there's some criteria. So I kind of in lay terms explained to you what a scholarly source or a trusted journal would be. And again, you have access to these journals through your school's library sources. There's databases available to you. And so this is the more specifics of what I just described in general terms earlier about what makes a source scholarly. This is some of those criteria, and I'll give you a moment to review that as well. Now let's look at credibility and examples. I've mentioned scholarly journals and that rigorous process that they go through. Books could be a reliable source. Editorial reviews help ensure that they are reliable. Books might be a little bit more ambiguous sometimes to determine if they are scholarly or not. You'll just have to attend to some of those things that we've mentioned earlier in this PowerPoint. Research studies certainly go through a rigorous process before institutions will allow their name to be associated with research. And then you can see here how to prioritize sources. Usually if you're doing an assignment, a professor will tell you what type of sources to use and what to look at. You'll notice in a lot of our assignments, we're not necessarily always using scholarly articles. Sometimes we're just scanning the internet for something and we're practicing our writing skills using those things we've scanned on the internet, or maybe you've been provided a certain resource to use. Just know that what this lecture is doing is building your skills and your awareness to understand the difference. It's not saying that for every assignment you do for me, you'll be using these scholarly sources or even having to find them on your own. However, we are laying a foundation of understanding and comprehension of the differences. Okay, so just like we wanted to look at examples of scholarly sources, I want to show you some examples of non-scholarly sources. So I'll give you a minute to look at that. So it's not that it's wrong to use these sources, it just is used for specific outcomes. So to provide context, to guide your work, to maybe go to the next step. In our class, we may be practicing some skills and you may not get to that next step of going to scholarly sources, but I wanted you to really understand how they work in partnership together because it's not an all or nothing approach. There's certainly room for both. Always attending to the instruction of your assignment and the rubric is certainly important. Regardless if they're scholarly or not, though, they all should be cited. Everything that you use should be cited, and it should all be in your references or your work cited at the end of the paper. So the citation throughout the paper, and then your work cited at the end or your reference section, whichever formatting you end up using. Most likely you're using MLA for me, but maybe not. It just depends on what assignment it is. But attend to whatever you've been given as the direction for formatting. Just know that regardless if it's scholarly or not, it doesn't mean you don't have to cite it. It just means that the citations work separately, right? Everything you use is cited and put in your references, and everything you use just has to be presented in that framework. Just know that you should have a balance. I hope that makes sense. I feel like I maybe garbled that a little bit, so let me just rephrase that one more time. So whether it's scholarly or not, you're citing and you're providing your work cited or references. We use those interchangeably sometimes depending on the style of writing. But you're citing regardless. You're putting your references regardless. The scholarly versus non-scholarly is relevant for the way that you use the information and how it's trusted. Okay, so sometimes you're asked to look at different sides of a story, like a debate or an argumentative piece. And it's really not about your personal opinion always. Sometimes it might get confusing, like, oh, I'm supposed to find something I believe in and find a counter argument and say why I don't believe in this. It's not even about that. If you've ever been in debate club or heard about a debate team, what they're doing is they're presenting two sides of a quote-unquote argument, so two sides of a story. It doesn't necessarily mean that you personally believe in one side or the other. It's about presenting the perspective from both sides of that argument. But here, it's just talking about having multiple viewpoints, because some things you're going to come across in life are going to have multiple viewpoints. Including those different opinions will definitely help you have a more comprehensive paper when that's appropriate. Again, you'll be able to probably tell when it's appropriate if it's an argumentative style paper or not, for example. Usually that will follow the instructions you're given by the professor. And again, that just has a nod to looking beyond one source. And that goes into presenting multiple sides. And so when we talk about a debate or an argumentative piece, or when you're trying to present different varying sides of a situation, it's really not, again, about your opinion. And so neutrality, you can have that at the same time that you're presenting different perspectives. And these are just a few tips on how to do that. You could even ask someone to read your writing and say, hey, does this feel neutral, or does it feel like I'm leaning towards one side or the other? That might be important if if you're writing something for at work. So professionally, the connection here, if you're writing something, you would want to make sure that you're not leaning one way or the other. If you're just charged with presenting the facts, like say your person you work for has to make a big decision and you're tasked with gathering information from multiple viewpoints, then you want to make sure that you're being as neutral as it is appropriate to be. But also, if you're the receiver of the information, you want to be able to recognize language that's inflammatory, that's not neutral, and that essentially is persuasive, because you could get wrapped up and then maybe lean towards a certain side of the perspective without understanding all the facts. So the importance of being able to be neutral and understand that language is not just, again, in the writing of that, but also you as a receiver of information. So you can kind of filter that information out. And this just goes into those neutral summaries. I'll give you a minute to read the benefits here of neutral summaries. You'll see that word paraphrasing again here. And I think that one sentence at the top there probably says this better than I did. I might have used too many words to say. Neutral summaries help present opposing viewpoints fairly without personal bias or opinions. Drop the mic, that's the point. And this just kind of closes out here this section about the importance of citing sources. I think I've kind of beat that in at this point about the importance of avoiding plagiarism, whether it's intentional or unintentional. Proper citations help you avoid that. For me, I might not nitpick it as much, but there are professors, and then the further along you get into your career and your education, you may find that you have a situation where it's extremely important for you to cite sources so that no one calls you out on that. For us, we're just practicing, but we're practicing because it could matter substantially more in future situations. So unintentional plagiarism is the lack of citing, even if you didn't mean to. So pre-writing and drafting your essay, we've kind of already spoken about that a good amount through your different modules, but this just kind of gives you some of the, the summary steps to take. Go through your introduction and thesis, write your body, write your conclusion. You really should have no new information in the conclusion. And your introduction should not read like the body of your paragraph. This is the way we summarize it. You're going to tell them what you're going to tell them. That's the introduction. You're going to tell them what you're going to tell them succinctly. Then in the body, you're going to tell them. And in the conclusion, you're going to tell them what you told them. No new information. I will be very honest with you. I often start with the body and then I go back and write my introduction and conclusion. That assures that I'm not putting any new information, and my introduction and conclusion is just that which it should be without the new information. Okay, so not to beat that dead horse, but why neutrality matters. I would say number one is most important, especially when you're writing and you're sharing in a class and a learning community where opinions might vary. It's very, this is not debate where you're trying to convince people. We're not socially active in this class in the sense of like, we're not here to down somebody for their viewpoints or bring them over to our way of thinking. This is really about communication and how we practice those skills. And so we want to make sure that we have a respect for those diverse views. And the way that we do that is using very polished and careful, neutral language. I think also what's important here is that it mentions the neutrality encourages readers to critically evaluate arguments without that bias. That goes back to what I was saying a minute ago about you having to have these skills, not just as the consumer of information, but the provider. So both ways, right? You might be providing information and you might be consuming information. And the better you are at these skills, the better you'll be able to recognize when something is not, or it's the opposite. If you wanted a little checklist where you wanted to self-check, I'll move myself out of the way here. These are common mistakes to avoid. I'll say one more time, I'm always a big proponent of printing things out and having visuals in front of me. It helps me to more appropriately use materials. I'm floating all over the screen because I'm trying to keep my face out of the way of the writing. And then what should you do? Well, this is obviously going to come through the class assignments, but you're going to be practicing using writing tools. You've been probably exposed to Grammarly at this point. There's all kind of open source free resources on the internet that helps you review your writing. The feedback, like I said, feedback is the breakfast of champions, just being open to it and knowing that every time you write and then you get feedback and you do it again, you get better, right? Even if you got no feedback, writing and then writing again, you get better inherently. So I look forward to you having the opportunity to do that, not just in this class, but future classes and professionally at work as well. Because again, remember, it's not just writing in an academic sense, it's writing when you're communicating with others at work as well, or professionally. All right, well, thank you so much. I hope you guys have a good day.